Americans for Fair Taxation presents the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, president of Americans for Fair Taxation, and recorded by Bob Paxton, a volunteer with the Florida FAIRtax Educational Association. And now, this week's Chairman's Report.
Hello, I'm Bob Paxton with the AFFT Chairman's Report for Friday, November 10th, 2023. Income tax evasion, the reason that Social Security and Medicare are going broke. In April of 2021, Charles Rettig, former IRS commissioner, admitted what everyone who was paying attention already knew, that there's at least $1 trillion of income tax that's illegally evaded every year. That's $1 trillion a year that's legally owed but never collected. Now, unsurprisingly, the reaction outside of D.C. was more resignation than outrage. Many have commented that they feel like they're paying more than they should, and they wish they could find a way to pay less in federal income taxes, even if they have to resort to less than legal means to do it. Now, D.C. knows that having to cut back government programs like Social Security will create a massive amount of outrage against them. But their solution is not to fix the problem, but simply to hide it by borrowing more money and by selling government securities. Decades of low interest rates have lured D.C. into thinking that borrowed money is essentially free. But that idea is being proven false by the recent rapid and dramatic increases in interest rates. Now, MoneyWise provided the following data. America's gross national debt hit an eye-watering $33 trillion for the first time in September, and that came about mere months after eclipsing the $32 trillion mark earlier this year. In the current fiscal year through the end of September, the Treasury has shelled out $879.3 billion in interest on its debt. Now, that's more than the Department of Defense's budget for military programs. That totaled just $775.9 billion in the same period. Michael A. Peterson, CEO of the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, said, quoting, "With more than $10 trillion of interest costs over the next decade, this compounding fiscal cycle will only continue to do damage to our kids and grandkids." Now, all but the totally dim-witted can see that if the government continues to fund itself with borrowed money, the day will come when the interest on the national debt will consume 100% of the federal budget. And if interest rates continue to rise, that day will come sooner rather than later. Now, one impact of federal income tax evasion that is largely ignored is its impact on the Social Security Trust Fund. The 2023 Social Security Trustees report reported that Social Security's cost exceeded income by $22.1 billion. It says Social Security will be unable to pay 100% of benefits after 2033. Medicare inpatient hospital and post-acute care costs exceeded income by $53.9 billion, and Medicare will have to stop paying full benefits after 2031. Now, not reporting income and exaggerating deduction are the ways that most income tax evaders cheat on their taxes. But listen, in order to have $1 trillion worth of tax evasion, you have to have at least $10 trillion of taxable income that's escaping taxation. That assumes an effective federal income tax rate of 10%. Now, if that $10 trillion was honestly reported as taxable income, 10 trillion times 15.3%, that's 7.65% for the employee and 7.65% for the employer, that equals an additional $1.53 trillion for the Social Security Trust Fund. Now, if that money was coming into the trust fund, it would eliminate the current deficits and ensure the solvency of the trust fund into the future. In conclusion, it's easy to see that eliminating or greatly reducing federal tax evasion would eliminate or greatly reduce the current shortfall in Social Security funding. So, the question for D.C. is how to best accomplish that. Unfortunately, D.C.'s solution is both incredibly expensive, oppressive, and ineffective. Now, evaders don't mark their federal income tax returns, "I'm evading the income tax." Quite the contrary. They do everything they can to mask their evasion and make their returns look legitimate. Now, under D.C.'s plan, the IRS will have to aggressively audit 100% of taxpayers in order to locate the 15 to 20% who are evading their taxes. Now, even then, the IRS auditors are unlikely to uncover it all. Now, in the name of catching evaders, D.C. will insist on probing deeper and deeper into everyone's personal business. They'll want to know more and more about the financial dealings of all Americans. Now just think for a second. Do you want the IRS knowing how much is deposited in your bank account each month, where that money came from? Do you want them to know about every transaction you make on your credit card, how you spent your cash, gifts or reimbursements you received that might look like income but isn't? Do you want them to know what's in your safe deposit box? Well, expect that the IRS will want access to all of the above information in the name of catching tax cheaters. Now, we know that a country where the government believes that it's entitled to know that much about you is a country of subjects, not citizens. It's what so many have toiled and even died to prevent, but D.C. is still desperately seeking this kind of control. Now, D.C. is ignoring the one real solution that allows us to remain citizens and not subjects, the FAIRtax. The FAIRtax is simple, it's non-invasive, but most of all, it works. Now, while there will be some people who will find a way to evade the FAIRtax will greatly reduce federal tax evasion. Here's why. Over 90% of retail sales are made by less than 10% of sellers. Think Amazon, Walmart, and Target, etc. Now, to have a 10% overall evasion rate on retail sales, the other 90% of retailers will have to evade the FAIRtax at 100%. Sellers of retail services will collect the FAIRtax as they provide those services. Now, all sellers of retail services will use a resale permit to acquire any goods or services they need to provide their services. States will develop models to find service providers who are not collecting the FAIRtax, and the states will collect the FAIRtax using the same technology they use for the state sales taxes, and that has resulted in an evasion rate of less than 5%. The FAIRtax will ensure the future solvency of Social Security in two primary ways: greatly reducing illegal evasion and extending the tax base from just those working for a paycheck to everyone whose spending exceeds the poverty level. The solution? Pass the FAIRtax. Now, if you don't like the idea of the IRS and D.C. treating you like a subject instead of like a citizen by requiring you to reveal more and more of your private financial information, you should be helping in the effort to pass the FAIRtax. Under the FAIRtax, there are no more tax returns. You no longer have to disclose your personal financial information to the government. Banks and other financial institutions will no longer have to tell the government about the dividends and interest you received or about how much you made trading stocks, bonds, and other capital assets. There's no need for the government to know anything about your IRA because with a FAIRtax, you won't need an IRA. The FAIRtax lets everyone save for their retirement tax-free. And of course, if the government doesn't have your confidential financial data, they can't leak it. So, in addition to solving the confidentiality problem, the FAIRtax lets business owners concentrate on making their businesses more profitable and beneficial for both their shareholders and employees. President Biden and Congress, pass the FAIRtax. Do the right thing for the American people. Fix the broken income payroll tax system. You can go down in history as the ones who freed all present and future Americans from the tyranny of the income payroll tax system. You can ensure that there will be no more leaks of our confidential information, and you can transfer power back to the American people over how much tax we pay. The FAIRtax transfers power from Congress and the bureaucrats to the people. We, not D.C., will decide how much federal tax we pay. With the FAIRtax, there is no IRS. The states will collect the FAIRtax. And only retail businesses will have to collect the FAIRtax and remit it to the government. Now, since less than 10% of the retailers account for 90% of retail purchases, there will be much less opportunity for evasion. So, why would D.C. pass the FAIRtax and give up this almost unlimited source of donations? Well, they won't, at least not voluntarily. The only way they will is if the rest of us demand it. So isn't it time to end this ludicrous tax collection system and the IRS along with it? Now, there's going to be a vote on the FAIRtax in the House of Representatives. We now have the opportunity to force all members of the House to show where they stand. They can vote for the president income payroll tax system, or they can vote for the FAIRtax. They can support the corrupt income tax in the IRS, or they can vote to eliminate it. It can't be any simpler than that. They can hide the true cost of their government, or they can pass the FAIRtax and show everyone the true cost of government on every retail receipt. And finally, they can support the largest transfer of power from the government to the people, the FAIRtax, or they can vote against it. Now, if members think the FAIRtax needs to be amended to address a problem, then they can propose the change. Don't let them get away with rejecting the entire bill because it has a perceived flaw that can be easily addressed. Please stand with us and demand that your representatives support a much fairer, much simpler, and much more efficient way to fund the government, the FAIRtax. The FAIRtax doesn't pick winners and losers. Because it taxes spending, not earnings, the FAIRtax lets everyone save for their retirement tax-free. The FAIRtax will allow us to take back control. The income payroll tax system is broken. It's no longer working. We can't repair it, but we can replace it with the FAIRtax. Join us and take back control of our country and our lives, not with bullets, but with the elimination of one of the biggest threats to our liberty and economic prosperity, the income payroll tax. We should all remember Edmund Burke's warning that applies to our efforts to take back control. Nobody made a greater mistake than he who did nothing because he could only do a little. We should also remember this quote from George Orwell's 1984, which, if we do nothing, may foretell your and your children's future. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. So what can each of us do? We can write letters and make calls to our elected representatives and attend Zoom town hall meetings demanding that if they really want to allow Americans to take back control, the first step is to eliminate the income payroll tax system and enact the FAIRtax. Take back control. Help us pass the FAIRtax. Help us bring about real tax reform and stop future IRS abuses. By contributing or investing $10.40 a month, you help provide a financial base to Americans for fair taxation. Now, if you can make larger contributions/investments, these will be used not for salaries, as we're all volunteers, but for the needed updates to our economic studies, which will be vital for all future years. Please go to fairtax.org and invest in AFFT. It's an investment in your and your family's future.
This has been the Weekly Chairman's Report, written by Steve Hayes, President of Americans for Fair Taxation. Check back every week for news and information about the fair tax and learn why the fair tax should replace our antiquated federal income tax system. If you'd like to receive a copy of the Chairman's Report in your inbox every week, sign up at fairtax.org.